Winter in the Kaibab National Forest does not forgive mistakes. In northern Arizona, from December to March, these 640,000 hectares of ancient forest become a death trap where civilization is but a distant mirage. December 2016 was particularly merciless. Nighttime temperatures dropped to -8 degrees Celsius, and snowstorms could strike suddenly, reducing visibility to almost zero in a matter of minutes. Under such conditions, a person without special training could die of hypothermia in 3 to 4 hours. A more insidious danger is wet clothing, which increases heat loss by 10 times and significantly reduces survival time. Forest Road 22. A narrow road winding through the heart of the forest becomes especially treacherous in winter. The asphalt quickly turns to gravel, then to a barely visible rut among the pines. The road is unmaintained from November through April, a fact known to locals but ignored by tourist GPS systems. Here, rescuers pull out dozens of motorists stuck in snowdrifts each year. Some are found too late. The highway leading to the north rim of the Grand Canyon is officially closed from October 15 to May 15th. This section, at 2,400 meters above sea level, turns into an Arctic desert in winter. Rangers warn, no exceptions for regular tourists. The area around the Grand Canyon becomes a high-risk zone for unprepared travelers in winter. The lack of cellular signal means that any malfunction becomes a fight for life. The contrast is striking. The same elevations that create spectacular scenery form climate traps. In this frighteningly beautiful and ruthless environment begins the story of a family whose holiday trip turns into a desperate fight for survival. Karen Klein, 46, an environmental science instructor at a Pennsylvania college, was the epitome of positive energy. Tall, with an athletic build, she always made time for a morning jog despite a busy schedule of lectures and research. In the past, she worked as an environmental educator, teaching children basic survival skills in nature: how to build shelter, what plants to eat, how to navigate by the stars. Skills she never thought she'd apply in the actual fight for life. Her husband Eric was the complete opposite, a calm, judicious social worker. His passion was helping disadvantaged children. The year before the trip, Eric had suffered a serious back injury, and by December 2016 was still in the process of rehabilitation. Physical activity was difficult for him, but he never complained. Other people have a much harder time, he often said when Karen worried about his condition. Their 10-year-old son, Izzy, inherited his mom's energy and dad's kindness. An inquisitive boy with unruly hair and perpetually untied shoelaces, he grew up in a loving and supportive environment. At school, Izzy shone in science class, often sharing the knowledge he received from his mother. In his free time, he tended to his pets, who seemed to understand him better than some of his classmates. In Pennsylvania, the Klein family lived an ordinary middle-class life. A cozy house in the suburbs, a steady job, family dinners, and weekends in the park. But a few times a year they tried to break out of the routine to show Izzy different parts of America. Traveling became their way of creating special memories that wouldn't get lost among the monotonous, everyday life. December 2016, they decided to spend differently than usual. Instead of the usual visit to relatives for Christmas, the Kleins booked tickets to Las Vegas, not to gamble, but to show Izzy the city of lights and experiences, and then explore the famous national parks of the Southwest. After landing in Las Vegas, they rented a car and checked into a hotel on the famous Strip. The first days were filled with typical tourist attractions: a visit to the Wax Museum, where Izzy was photographed with wax doppelgangers of his favorite superheroes, walks through the neon streets of the city, where the boy enthusiastically looked at architectural copies of world landmarks. The highlight of the trip was to be the Cirque du Soleil show, Love, for which they had tickets for December 24th. The show, which celebrates the music of the Beatles, promised to be the perfect Christmas gift for the whole family. "We have 3 days between the show and coming home. Maybe we should see the parks," Karen suggested one evening while looking at a tourist map of the region. The idea seemed reasonable, Zion, Bryce Canyon, and the Grand Canyon were all relatively close to Las Vegas. 3 days was enough time to see the main attractions and get back to the show. Neither of them had checked the weather forecast for northern Arizona or road conditions. They were experienced travelers in the eastern states, but the West, with its extreme elevation and temperature differences, remained uncharted territory for them. Plus, their GPS unit, which had faithfully served them for years, seemed like a reliable guide through any terrain. This blind faith in technology and lack of information about the region's winter features were the first links in a chain of events that would soon bring the entire Klein family to the brink between life and death in the snowy stillness of the Kaibab National Forest. The morning of December 22, 2016, was clear and deceptively calm as the Klein family drove east out of Las Vegas. The plan seemed simple: visit 3 national parks, Zion, Bryce Canyon, and Grand Canyon, in 3 days, and return to Las Vegas by the evening of December 24 for a Cirque du Soleil show. The schedule was tight but doable. At least that's what Karen thought as she studied the map in the passenger seat. Their first stop was Zion, a realm of red sandstone cliffs overlooking narrow canyons. In the summer months, there was an apple in the sky from the tourists, but in the winter, the park seemed almost deserted. They spent only a couple of hours here, taking a few pictures and taking a hasty tour of the visitors center. Izzy was particularly impressed with the stories of the mountain lions that still lived in the remote corners of the park. "Can we stay and look for them?" he asked, but Karen gently reminded him of his busy schedule. By noon, they were on their way to Bryce Canyon with its famous hoodoos, bizarre stone columns created by erosion. Here the landscape was already showing signs of winter. Snow covered the tops of the cliffs, and the trails were partially icy. Eric, still recovering from a broken back, could go no further than the lookout. "You go ahead, I'll wait here," he said. But Karen decided they would stay together. They spent less than an hour in Bryce Canyon. "Next stop, Grand Canyon North Rim," Karen announced as she entered the destination into the GPS. The navigator calculated the route, showing an arrival time of 4:30 p.m. "We'll have time to watch the sunset over the canyon," she rejoiced, unaware that her plans were not destined to come true. The first warning sign was a message on the GPS screen. Route changed due to closed road. The main AZ-67 highway leading to the north rim of the Grand Canyon was closed for the winter. The navigator, failing to recognize the reason for the closure, automatically redirected them to an alternate route, along Forest Road 22. At first, the road seemed decent enough. Paved, though narrow, it meandered between the majestic pines of the Kaibab National Forest. Izzy looked at the snow-covered trees with delight, and Eric unconsciously gripped the steering wheel tighter, noticing how oncoming cars were becoming more and more rare. "It's strange that there are so few people here," Karen remarked when they hadn't seen a single car in about half an hour. Eric only shrugged. "Maybe it's not the season for tourists." About 45 minutes after they turned onto Forest Road 22, the asphalt ended, replaced by gravel. Another 15 minutes later and the gravel was gone, leaving only snow-covered dirt. The light snowfall that had started an hour ago had now intensified. Large flakes slowly descended on the windshield of the car, creating a hypnotic effect. "Maybe we should turn back," Eric suggested uncertainly, as the road became almost indistinguishable under the freshly fallen snow. "The navigator shows it's only 20 minutes to the Grand Canyon," Karen objected, though the GPS signal was becoming increasingly intermittent. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon on December 22, 2016, 8 miles deep off the main highway, their car came to an abrupt stop. Eric was attempting to make a U-turn on the narrow road when the rear wheel slipped into a shallow ditch hidden beneath the snow. The engine roared, and the wheels spun helplessly, but the car only got deeper into the wet snow and mud. They got out to assess the situation. The cold wind immediately crept under their lightweight city jackets. None of them were designed for temperatures below freezing. Izzy's cheeks and nose quickly turned red from the cold, and his sneakers were instantly soaked in snow. "Let's try putting branches under the tires," Karen suggested, remembering a trick from some survival TV show. They spent the next half hour gathering branches and shoving them under the tires that were spinning. Eric stepped on the gas. Karen and Izzy pushed from behind, but the car buried itself deeper and deeper in the spreading snow. "Phones!" Karen suddenly exclaimed, but a check of all three cellular devices showed the same thing. No signal. They were in an area completely devoid of cellular service. The GPS unit had lost its satellite signal too. The screen showed only a blank map with a flashing error message. Suddenly, their only technological guide in this wilderness was a useless piece of plastic. "What are we going to do?" Izzy asked, and fear sounded in his voice for the first time. Eric and Karen exchanged glances that read a growing realization of the gravity of the situation. It was rapidly getting darker. The temperature was dropping. The snow was intensifying. They were alone in the middle of nowhere with no communications, no suitable clothing, in a stranded car, 8 miles from the nearest major road. And ahead was a night that promised to be very cold in the Kaibab forest. The coming twilight painted the forest in ominous shades of gray. The snow continued to fall, and the temperature was rapidly dropping to -8 degrees Celsius. The Kleins gathered in the car, turning on the motor for warmth, to discuss options. Karen listed 3 possibilities: for everyone to go looking for help, to stay in the car and wait for a random passerby, or to go alone to get help. Eric immediately dismissed the first option. In the dark, with no flashlights or warm clothes, they risked freezing the whole family to death. The second option seemed no better. They hadn't seen a single car in the last hour and a half, and a night in the woods without enough fuel for constant heating was deadly. That left a third option. Eric couldn't go because of a recent back injury. Izzy was too small. The choice fell to Karen. "I'll go. I'm a runner. I have good stamina. If the road led us here, it can be used to get back out to civilization." Karen gathered the essentials in her pockets. Her cell phone, a few energy bars, and a bottle of water. "By my calculations, it's about 8 miles to the main highway. If I walk at a good pace, I can get there in a couple hours." They didn't know how optimistic that forecast was. "What if you don't come back?" Izzy asked, in a voice trying to be brave but losing to fear. "I'll come back, I promise. Or I'll send help. Most importantly, stay in the car, keep warm." She turned to Eric. Their gazes met, and years together allowed them to exchange 100 unspoken words. "If I'm not back by morning and help doesn't arrive, you may have to go too," she said quietly. "But wait for dawn first." At 3:30 p.m. on December 22nd, 2016, Karen Klein stepped from the relative comfort of the car into the cold stillness of the snow-covered forest. Through the fogged glass, Eric and Izzy watched her silhouette dissolve into the shroud of snow. In an instant, an ordinary family vacation turned into an ordeal where the stakes rose dramatically. What began as a carefree trip through national parks would now become a desperate struggle for survival in the merciless winter forest. And 3 destinies, hitherto inextricably linked, are now on separate paths. The first kilometers were relatively easy for Karen. Adrenaline energized her, and the hope of finding help drove her forward. She walked briskly along the ruts, checking her phone periodically, but there was no signal. The snowfall was intensifying. The beautiful winter evening was turning into a real blizzard. The wind was tossing prickly snowflakes in her face, making breathing and visibility difficult. The temperature dropped to -9 degrees Celsius by 1700 hours. A light fleece jacket could not protect from the biting cold. Jeans and shoes got wet. Each step was getting harder and harder, and we had not walked more than a third of the way. 8 miles, she repeated like a mantra. I've run more than that. But running on a groomed track was nothing compared to traversing a snow-covered forest road in soggy shoes in sub-zero temperatures. By 6 p.m., the first signs of hypothermia had appeared: uncontrollable shivering, numb fingers, lethargy of thoughts. You can't stop for long. She remembered the principle of survival in the cold. Only movement could maintain the necessary body temperature. In the stuck car, Eric wrestled with his own demons. Anxiety for Karen mingled with the need to calm his son. He periodically killed and restarted the engine, increasingly worried about the fuel supply. Izzy lulled in the back seat, wrapped in his jacket and his father's sweater. "Dad, do you think Mom has found help yet?" he asked. "Of course she has. She's probably on the highway by now," lied Eric. In fact, his anxiety was growing by the minute. He knew that even under ideal conditions, Karen wouldn't have made it to the highway by now. The snow had almost completely covered her tracks. The car stood in the middle of the white desert, as if cut off from the world. By 8 p.m., Karen had lost track of time and distance. The road now seemed only a vague shadow. She walked almost blindly, guided more by intuition. Her cell phone was dead in the cold. Movement was becoming difficult. Her thoughts were jumbled. First she thought about Izzy and Eric, then about the students, then about some absurd little thing. Karen knew it was a sign of hypothermia, when the brain works irrationally, but she couldn't stop this inner chaos. The blizzard had turned into a storm. Visibility was reduced to a few meters, and the temperature dropped to minus 11 degrees Celsius. At some point, Karen realized that she had been walking for more than 5 hours, but the highway still hadn't appeared. The idea of going back to the car was doubtful, as the blizzard had already covered her tracks. There was only one thing left to do: keep walking forward, hoping for a miracle. Eric lay awake, planning what he would do in the morning if Karen didn't return. The injury to his back caused constant pain, but he found it easier to think about the physical pain than the uncertainty that shrouded his wife's fate. The wristwatch showed midnight, 9 hours since their car had gotten stuck. The temperature had dropped to minus 12 degrees Celsius, and the wind was intensifying the cold feeling to minus 20 degrees Celsius. It was the coldest night of their lives. The morning of December 23rd greeted Eric and Izzy with pale light through the frosted windows. It had been an agonizing night. Their breath was turning to vapor, and they were running out of fuel. "Mom's not back yet?" Izzy's first waking question. Eric shook his head. The first thing he thought of was Karen couldn't find help. "I have to go look for help," he uttered, though inside everything was turning over at the thought of leaving his son alone. "No, Dad, don't go. We won't survive another night without fuel. I have to try," Eric quickly explained. Izzy would get most of the food and water, should only start the car when absolutely necessary, and not open the door for anyone except the cops or rangers. At 7:30, Eric stepped out into the freezing morning. The snow had stopped, but it had piled up knee-deep overnight. He walked in the opposite direction of Karen's route. Every step made his back ache. For Izzy, time stood still. With his father gone, he was left utterly alone amidst the vast white stillness. He turned on the radio, went through his belongings, counted his supplies, did everything he could to avoid thinking about his parents. When the cold became unbearable, he briefly started the engine. The thermometer showed minus 6 degrees Celsius inside the cabin. Eric had been walking for 5 hours. The pain in his back became constant, but he realized that stopping would do no good. By noon, he had accomplished the impossible. He had walked nearly 15 miles in the snow. Every kilometer was a test of will, but here, all his qualities of a father, ready to do anything for his family, were manifested. At last, a cleared road appeared ahead. As he climbed the hill, he saw a single streak of signal on his cell phone. With trembling fingers, he dialed 911. "911, what's your emergency?" "We're in trouble. My wife is missing. My son is alone in the car. We're stranded in the Kaibab forest." Meanwhile, Karen had reached some road by dawn. Her body was on edge. Her muscles refused to obey and her left leg was beginning to lose sensation. Along the way, she came across a road sign that read, Grand Canyon Visitor Center, 6 miles. That gave her a new purpose, but her condition worsened by the hour. She walked all day with short breaks. By mid-afternoon, she had barely covered half the distance. Her mind worked only on instincts, to move, to breathe, to survive. At 2 p.m., a full-scale rescue operation began. The Coconino County Sheriff's Office mobilized 2 teams, one on snowmobiles headed for the stranded vehicle, while the other began gathering equipment to search for Karen. Eric, shivering with cold and exhaustion, sat in the warm cabin of the rescue SUV, marking his wife's estimated route on a map. By 4:30 p.m., the snowmobilers reached the car. Izzy had spent nearly 9 hours alone. When the snowmobiles with bright flashing beacons appeared through the twilight, he couldn't immediately believe his eyes. Exhausted, his eyes swollen with tears, the boy climbed out of the frozen vehicle and rushed to the rescuers. His first words were not about himself, not about the cold and fear, but about his mother. "Did you find Mom?" The Rangers' hearts clenched. They knew that a woman who had spent over 24 hours in such conditions without proper equipment had minimal chance of survival, but no one said it out loud. After taking samples of Karen's footprints from where she had left the car, 5 experienced National Park Service trackers with search dogs set out on her intended route. They were to walk through the night on tracks that the blizzard had all but obscured. Eric and Izzy were wrapped in thermal blankets, given hot drinks, and evacuated to a hospital in Kanab, Utah. Both showed signs of frostbite on their toes, and Izzy suffered from mild hypothermia. The boy, exhausted by loneliness and fear, fell asleep as soon as the ambulance touched down, still clutching in his hand a picture of the family he had taken from his father's wallet. By the evening of December 23, Kaibab Forest had become an icy trap for a family separated by dozens of miles. Their Christmas vacation turned into a fight for life, where every decision could be their last. Karen reached the ranger cabin at the Grand Canyon at 3 o'clock in the morning on December 23rd. 26 miles through the blizzard were behind her. Her left foot, shoeless, left bloody footprints in the snow. The cabin was closed for the winter, dark, with boarded shutters. Wrapping her jacket around her arm, Karen smashed the window and squeezed inside, collapsing to the wooden floor. In the pitch darkness, she fumbled for a closet of blankets. Wrapping herself up, she climbed onto the bed. Her consciousness was hazy. Her body was on the verge of developing rhabdomyolysis. Decaying muscles were releasing creatine kinase into the blood, the level of which exceeded the norm by 50 times. His kidneys were on the verge of failure. Izzy thrashed around in his hospital bed. He couldn't sleep. The image of his mother walking out into the blizzard was in his mind's eye. Eric stayed close to his son, despite his own frostbite. Every half an hour he asked about the news of the search operation. It was the morning of December 24th. It had been 33 hours since Karen had left. In the cabin, dim dawn was breaking through the frosted windows. Karen had fallen into a semi-conscious state. Her temperature had dropped to a critical 35 degrees Celsius. Outside, the worst storm in a decade was raging. Wind gusts of up to 50 kilometers per hour and visibility of a few meters. The search operation was in danger of collapsing. 5 rangers decided to continue the search despite the warnings of the Weather Service. Orienting themselves by faint footprints, then by compass and intuition, they advanced along Karen's presumed route. "Dad, it's Christmas Eve. We're supposed to go to a show in Las Vegas," Izzy pronounced, looking at the blizzard outside the window. Eric squeezed his son's hand tighter. "We'll definitely go next year, the whole family." At that moment, the Coconino County Sheriff walked in. "Mr. Klein, can I talk to you for a minute?" Eric's heart sank. In the cabin, Karen no longer distinguished between reality and delusion. Suddenly, lantern beams cut through the darkness. Voices, a knock on the door. The door swung open. 5 rangers rushed inside. the beams sweeping around until they stopped on a coiled tangle of blankets. "Here! We found her! She's alive!" Karen was in critical condition. Frostbite, exhaustion, hypothermia. "My son! Husband!" was the only thing she could whisper. "They're safe! Everything's going to be okay now." At 2 a.m. on December 24, 34 hours after leaving the car, Karen was found. It seemed the worst was over, but her body was on edge, and the fight for life was just beginning. A brisk wind whipped across the faces of the rescuers, carrying Karen to the snowmobile. It was several kilometers to the cleared road. Pulse weak, temperature critically low, the medic reported over the radio. "We need an emergency evacuation." The blizzard intensified, visibility dropping to near zero. The Rangers moved in a chain, navigating more by GPS. Karen, wrapped in thermal blankets, fainted here and there, mumbling the names of her husband and son. At 5 a.m., rescuers reached the road where an ambulance was waiting. Medics hooked up IVs, started warming her up. "Do you think he'll make it?" the ranger asked the nurse. "A couple hours later, there would have been no chance," the man replied. "It all depends on speed now." At Kanab's hospital, the sheriff took Eric aside. "I have news about your wife. She was found alive." Eric's knees buckled and he leaned against the wall. "Where? How is she?" "At the ranger hut by the North Rim. Condition is critical but stable." Eric rushed over to Izzy, who was waiting anxiously on the bed. "Mom's been found. She's alive." The boy froze, then burst into tears, for the first time since they'd been stuck in the snow. In the early morning hours, the ambulance with Karen arrived at the hospital. Dr. Shannon Little was in charge of admissions. "What do we have?" "Female, 46 years old. Hypothermia, second-degree frostbite. Signs of dehydration and exhaustion. Labs showed creatine kinase levels over 10,000 units, with a normal of under 200. A sign of severe muscle tissue damage. We need to transfer her to Regional Medical Center," the doctor decided. "There's no hemodialysis equipment here." Eric and Izzy were only allowed a glimpse of Karen through the ICU glass. Even from a distance, they could see how she had changed. The gaunt face, the bluish skin, the tubes and wires all around her. "She's very strong," the nurse said. "To walk 26 miles in the snow, to survive in those conditions, it borders on the impossible." When Rangers saw the cabin's broken window, they knew someone was desperate to survive. But no one could have guessed that inside they would find a woman who had accomplished the near impossible, driven by love for her family and an unyielding will to live. Karen was transported to Dixit Regional Medical Center in St. George, Utah, a specialized facility with an intensive care unit. The first 24 hours were critical. Doctors struggled not only with frostbite, but also with the looming threat of kidney failure due to the massive breakdown of muscle tissue. On Christmas Eve, the Klein family was separated, with Karen in the ICU and Eric and Izzy in a shared room at Kanab Hospital. No Christmas decorations, just sterile walls and the smell of medicine. But this day was a true miracle for them. All three stayed alive against all expectations. The next morning, Karen's condition began to stabilize. Strong IVs helped avoid dialysis, and the frostbite, though severe, did not require amputation. Eric and Izzy were transported to the same hospital to be closer to her. The first meeting after the rescue took place 48 hours later. Karen was still weak, but already conscious. When Izzy and Eric entered the room, she tried to pull herself up. There were no tears. All three were too exhausted. But the hug said more than words. "I knew you'd make it," Karen whispered, cradling her son against her chest. "And I knew you'd come back," Izzy replied, though they both realized it wasn't the complete truth. In those long hours of loneliness, they each struggled with despair. The medical staff who witnessed the scene did not hide their emotions. Even experienced doctors recognized that the Klein family's survival was an exceptional case of human resilience. Karen spent 5 days in the hospital. Her recovery was described by doctors as remarkably rapid for someone who had survived such an extreme ordeal. By December 29, the Kleins were ready to return home to Pennsylvania, although physical rehabilitation, especially for Karen, was a long road ahead. The story of their survival became a Christmas sensation in the region. Local newspapers called the case a Christmas miracle in Kaibab Forest. But for the Kleins themselves, the main miracle was that they were together again. Tired, scarred, but alive. The return to Pennsylvania was quiet, with no grand reunions. The plane landed in Philadelphia on the evening of December 29, 2016. The Kleins returned to their suburban home, which seemed so unaccustomedly cozy and safe now. Physical recovery was taking its course. Karen was undergoing intensive therapy to rebuild muscle tissue. Her left foot, the one most affected by frostbite, was gradually healing, although sensitivity was slow to return. Eric dealt with the effects of hypothermia more quickly, but his back injury worsened after the long transition, requiring additional treatment. But the most difficult part was the psychological recovery. Karen was plagued by nightmares and guilt. How could I leave them? Why didn't we turn back immediately when the GPS went haywire? Izzy was showing signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. Sudden sounds startled him, and snowfalls triggered panic attacks. Over time, an ordeal that could have torn the family apart only strengthened their bond. They began to appreciate every moment together more, finding joy in the simple things. I used to always be in a hurry to get somewhere, chasing some achievement, Karen told a local newspaper a year later. Now I realize the ordinary moments are the most precious. Just sitting with a cup of tea, watching the birds outside the window, that's real happiness. Izzy, who was in therapy, found a way to reframe the traumatic experience. What my mom did is what she always did. She's the strongest person I know. And Dad, if he hadn't acted so quickly and effectively, Mom would have died. A year later, the Kleins did attend Cirque du Soleil's Love Show in Las Vegas. It was a peculiar point in history that changed their lives forever and showed what love can do when it comes to saving those closest to them. The Klein family's story is not just a tale of survival. It's a reminder of how easily modern man's reliance on technology can leave him defenseless in the face of wildlife. If you ever take a winter road trip, remember these simple rules. Always check your route ahead of time. Don't rely solely on GPS. Let someone know your plans and expected return time. Keep an emergency kit in your car, blankets, non-perishable food, water, flashlight. If you get stuck, stay in your vehicle. It provides cover and makes you more visible to rescuers. Run the engine periodically for warmth, making sure the exhaust pipe is not blocked by snow. Statistics show that more than 2,000 people in the U.S. each year find themselves in situations similar to what the Kleins experienced. More than half of the cases are due to over-reliance on technology. But the most important lesson of this story isn't in the practical advice. It is that the human spirit, motivated by love for loved ones, can transcend all physical limitations, accomplish the impossible, and return home from even the most hopeless situation. Winter in the Kaibab Forest continues day after day, with new snowstorms hitting the expanse. But the Klein family story will forever be a reminder that only a thin line of our decisions can lie between survival and doom. Now the question for you is, what would you do if you were in their situation? Would you all stay together in the car, or would you do the same, sending the toughest one to get help? Many experts believe that the family should have stayed together, but then would they all have survived? Was it a mistake to completely depend on the GPS, or was it just bad luck that could have happened to anyone? Share your opinions in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to put a like, as well as subscribe to the channel that would not miss new incredible survival stories. There are still a lot of interesting things ahead. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next episodes.